The marble floors of the mansion echoed with one cold command. Get out. The powerful mafia boss, Adrian Volkov, didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words alone were enough to freeze every servant in the room. At the center of the hallway stood Lena, the mansion's poor maid, her hands trembling, her eyes full of tears. The cleaning lady who had quietly taken care of Adrian's little baby son for months was now being thrown out like she meant nothing. Behind Adrian, his jealous fiancée smirked with satisfaction. Pack your things and leave, Adrian repeated coldly. Lena lowered her head, trying to hide the pain in her eyes as she turned toward the door. But just as she reached the steps, a tiny cry suddenly filled the mansion. The baby boy had escaped the nanny's arms. And before anyone could stop him, the child crawled across the marble floor toward the crying maid, tears streaming down his tiny face. What happened next stunned everyone. Stay with us until the end of this emotional story. The Volkov mansion stood on the edge of the city like a kingdom built from silence, money, and fear. Its black iron gates were always guarded. Its marble halls were always spotless. Its staff moved like shadows, careful not to speak too loudly, careful not to make mistakes. Because this was not just a rich man's house. It belonged to Adrian Volkov. The name alone was enough to make powerful men lower their eyes. Some called him a billionaire. Others called him a mafia boss. In truth, he was both. Cold, respected, and impossible to read. Adrian ruled his business empire the same way he ruled his mansion, with control, discipline, and distance. And in that giant, glittering house, Lena felt smaller than ever. She was only a poor maid, hired 6 months earlier after her mother's medical bills left her drowning in debt. She kept her head down, wore simple faded uniforms, and worked longer than anyone else. She cleaned the chandeliers, polished the floors, changed the flowers, and disappeared before anyone important entered the room. That was how Lena survived. Quietly, invisibly. But there was one soul in the mansion who always saw her. Nico. Adrian's 1-year-old baby son had soft dark hair, wide gray eyes, and the strange habit of watching people in complete silence before deciding whether he trusted them. Around most people, he was restless. Around strangers, he cried. Around Adrian's fiancée, he turned his face away and pushed at her hands with stubborn little palms. But around Lena, he became sunlight. The first time it happened, Lena had been dusting the nursery while the nanny stepped away for a phone call. Nico had been fussing in his crib, cheeks wet with tears, his tiny fists clenched. Lena froze. She knew the rules. The servants were not to interfere unless ordered. But the crying grew louder. "Shoo, it's okay," she whispered softly, moving closer. The moment she touched his tiny hand, the baby went quiet. His fingers curled around hers with surprising strength. Lena's heart melted. From that day on, whenever she worked near the nursery, Nico would reach for her. He laughed when she made funny faces. He kicked his little legs when she sang old lullabies under her breath. Sometimes, when no one was watching, Lena carried him near the tall windows and pointed at the birds in the garden. Nico would press his cheek against her shoulder and sigh as if, in her arms, the whole world finally felt safe. Even the older housekeeper noticed. "That child loves you," she whispered one afternoon. Lena smiled sadly. "He just likes kindness." But kindness was rare inside that mansion, especially after Sophia entered the picture. Sophia DeLuca, Adrian's elegant fiancée, wore designer dresses like armor and smiles like knives. She was beautiful in the polished, dangerous way of women who knew exactly how much power beauty could buy. She moved through the mansion as if she already owned every wall, every servant, every breath in the air. And she hated the way Nico reacted to Lena. One morning, Sophia walked into the nursery in a silk red dress and expensive perfume. Nico was in Lena's arms, giggling as Lena bounced him gently. Sophia stopped at the door. Her eyes narrowed. Why is the cleaning lady holding him? Lena stiffened and quickly lowered the baby into his play chair. The nanny was in the washroom, ma'am. He was crying. Sophia stepped closer, her heels clicking like warning shots against the floor. And you thought that gave you permission? I was only trying to calm him. Sophia looked at Lena, then at the baby. Nico reached toward Lena again, his lower lip trembling when she stepped back. A hard shadow crossed Sophia's face. That was the moment jealousy was born. From then on, Sophia began watching everything. The way Nico smiled at Lena. The way he cried when she left the room. The way even Adrian, cold as winter, paused once when he saw his son asleep against the maid's shoulder. Sophia saw it all, and in her heart, a cruel plan began to form. Because in that mansion, a crying poor maid was easy to replace. But a child's love? That was dangerous. The tension inside the Volkov mansion grew slowly, like a storm gathering behind dark clouds. For weeks, Sophia watched everything. She watched the way baby Nico brightened whenever Lena entered the room. She watched how the poor maid gently wiped the baby's tears, how he clung to her uniform with tiny fingers, refusing to let go. And every time it happened, something cold twisted deeper inside Sophia's chest. To her, it wasn't sweet. It was humiliating. She was the future wife of the most feared mafia boss in the city. She would soon become the lady of the Volkov Empire. Yet the baby who should adore her instead reached for a simple cleaning lady. That insult burned like poison. One afternoon, Sophia finally decided she had seen enough. Adrian Volkov was in his private office overlooking the city, a place where very few people dared to enter without permission. The walls were dark wood, the windows tall, and the air always felt colder when he was inside. Sophia stepped into the room dramatically. "Adrian, we need to talk." The mafia boss barely looked up from the documents in his hands. "What is it?" "There's a problem in your house." Adrian slowly closed the file and leaned back in his chair. "Explain." Sophia sighed as if the situation exhausted her. "That maid. Lena." Adrian's expression remained unreadable. "What about her?" Sophia crossed her arms. "She's overstepping. I've seen her holding Nico, carrying him around like he belongs to her." The staff are starting to whisper. Adrian's eyes hardened slightly. "The nanny allows it?" "She disappears half the time," Sophia replied quickly. "But that's not the worst part." She paused for effect. "The child is becoming attached to the maid. It's not healthy." Adrian stood up slowly, tall and imposing. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Sophia met his gaze calmly. "That she's manipulating the situation." The word hung in the air like poison. Adrian walked toward the window, silent. Sophia continued, carefully choosing her words. "Adrian, you're a powerful man. A mafia boss. There are people who would do anything to gain influence inside this house. What if she's trying to use your son to secure her place here?" Adrian said nothing, but doubt had already begun creeping into the quiet spaces of his mind. That evening, everything exploded. The entire household was gathered in the grand marble hallway. Servants stood nervously along the walls, whispering among themselves. Lena had just finished cleaning the staircase when the housekeeper called her downstairs. When she entered the hall, she saw Adrian standing there. Beside him was Sophia. Lena's heart dropped instantly. The mafia boss looked colder than ever. "Lena," he said. Her hands tightened nervously. "Yes, sir?" Adrian's voice was calm, but heavy with authority. "I've been told you've been interfering with my son's care." Lena blinked in confusion. "I only helped when he was crying." Sophia stepped forward immediately. "She's lying." The servants exchanged uneasy glances. "She carries him around the house, like she's his mother," Sophia continued sharply. "It's completely inappropriate." Lena's face turned pale. "That's not true. I would never." Adrian raised his hand. Silence fell instantly. His voice was colder than ice. "This house has rules." Lena felt her throat tighten. "I understand, sir. I'll be more careful." "You won't need to." The words hit her like a slap. Adrian looked directly into her tear-filled eyes. "You're fired." The entire hallway went still. Lena stared at him, stunned. "Sir, please. I didn't do anything wrong." Sophia watched with quiet satisfaction. Adrian's expression didn't change. "You will collect your things and leave the mansion immediately." Lena's hands began to tremble. Her voice cracked. I need this job. That is not my concern." The crying poor maid lowered her head as tears finally slipped down her cheeks. Slowly, she picked up her small worn bag. None of the servants moved. None of them spoke. Everyone knew better than to challenge the decision of Adrian Volkov. Lena walked toward the massive front doors, her footsteps echoing across the marble floor. Behind her, Sophia crossed her arms triumphantly. It was over. The maid was gone. But just as Lena reached the mansion entrance, a sudden sound broke the silence. A small, desperate cry. "Mama!" Everyone turned. and what they saw next would leave the entire mansion shocked and stunned. The small cry echoed through the grand hallway like a crack in the silence. "Mama!" Every head turned toward the nursery corridor. The nanny suddenly appeared in the doorway, her face pale with panic. I'm sorry," she gasped. "He slipped from my arms." Before she could finish the sentence, something tiny and determined moved across the polished marble floor. Little Nico. The 1-year-old baby boy had escaped her grasp and was crawling as fast as his small hands and knees could carry him, straight toward Lena. The crying poor maid had just reached the front door when she heard the sound. She froze, slowly turning around. And then she saw him. "Nico." Her whisper trembled. The baby's cheeks were wet with tears. His small face was red from crying, and his little hands slapped against the cold marble as he crawled desperately across the floor. "Mama." The entire mansion watched in stunned silence. The servants exchanged shocked glances. Even the guards near the door looked confused. But the person who seemed most disturbed was Sophia. "What is he doing?" she snapped angrily. The nanny hurried forward. "Come here, Nico. Come to Nanny." But the child ignored her completely. He crawled faster. His tiny eyes were locked on only one person. Lena. The cleaning lady dropped her bag. "Nico, stop. You'll get hurt," she whispered, tears spilling down her face. But the baby didn't stop. He reached her feet and grabbed the hem of her maid uniform with both hands, pulling himself up clumsily. His little body shook as he cried harder, burying his face against her legs. The sight melted every servant's heart. The baby refused to let go. "Mama." Lena covered her mouth, trying to hold back sobs. "I'm so sorry," she whispered to him, gently touching his hair. But before she could lift him, a cold voice cut through the moment. "Give him to the nanny." It was Adrian. The Mafia boss stepped forward slowly, his expression darker than anyone had ever seen. The nanny approached carefully. "Come, Nico," she said softly, reaching for him. But the moment her hands touched him, the baby screamed. Loud. Desperate. He clung to Lena's uniform with surprising strength, his small fingers gripping the fabric like it was the only thing keeping him safe. "No, no." The nanny looked helpless. "I've never seen him like this." Sophia's face turned red with anger. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "He's just being spoiled." She marched forward and tried to pull the baby away herself. The result was immediate. Nico cried, even louder. His tiny body shook as he held onto Lena, his tears soaking into her dress. "Please," Lena whispered, her heart breaking. "Don't make him cry like this." Adrian watched everything in silence. Something in the scene didn't feel right. His son rarely cried. But now the baby was clinging to the maid who had just been fired, as if the world would end if she disappeared. Adrian's eyes narrowed. "Let her hold him," he said quietly. Sophia spun around in disbelief. "Adrian, let her hold him." The command was final. Slowly, Lena bent down and lifted the baby into her arms. The change was instant. Nico stopped crying. His small arms wrapped tightly around her neck as he buried his face against her shoulder, hiccuping softly. Within seconds, his breathing calmed. The entire mansion watched the moment unfold. The baby who refused everyone else had fallen quiet in the arms of the poor maid. Even Adrian looked slightly stunned. The silence stretched for several seconds. Then Sophia laughed sharply. "Oh, please," she said with forced confidence. "It's obvious what she's been doing." Adrian turned toward her. "What do you mean?" Sophia crossed her arms. "She's been manipulating him, spending time with him behind everyone's back so he would get attached." Lena's eyes widened. "That's not true." But Sophia continued coldly. "Look at him. He thinks she's his mother." The words hit the room like a storm. Adrian's gaze shifted slowly toward Lena, and the baby sleeping quietly in her arms. Something strange stirred in his chest. Something he couldn't explain. Because suddenly, a terrifying question entered his mind. Why did his son trust this poor maid more than anyone else in the entire mansion? And the answer to that question was a secret that would soon change everything. The mansion had never been this quiet. Every servant stood frozen in the hallway, watching the unbelievable scene unfold before their eyes. In Lena's arms, little Nico had finally stopped crying. His tiny fingers still clutched her uniform tightly, as if letting go would make her disappear forever. His small head rested against her shoulder, his breathing calm again. But Adrian Volkov's mind was anything but calm. The powerful mafia boss stared at the woman he had just fired. Then he looked at his son. Something didn't add up. Babies didn't form attachments like this overnight. Nico barely trusted anyone. Not the nanny, not the housekeeper, not even Sophia. Yet with Lena, he was peaceful. Adrian's deep voice broke the silence. How long has this been happening? Lena looked up nervously. I don't understand. Adrian's sharp gaze didn't soften. My son, how long has he been this attached to you? Lena hesitated. I never tried to make it happen, she said quietly. He just cried a lot when I worked near the nursery. Sometimes the nanny was busy, so I helped calm him. Sophia scoffed loudly. Of course she did. That's exactly how manipulation starts. But this time, Adrian didn't look at Sophia. His eyes stayed on Lena. Why didn't anyone tell me? The nanny stepped forward carefully. Sir, we thought it was harmless. The baby sleeps better when she sings to him. The room fell silent again. Adrian slowly approached Lena. Nico stirred slightly in her arms, but didn't wake. Look at me, Adrian said. Lena raised her eyes. What you said earlier, Adrian continued. You said you needed this job. Her voice trembled. Yes, my mother is sick. The hospital bills. She stopped, ashamed of sounding like she was begging. But Adrian was studying something else. Nico's tiny hand. The baby's fingers were tightly wrapped around Lena's necklace chain. Adrian frowned slightly. That necklace, where did you get it? Lena instinctively touched the small silver pendant resting against her chest. My mother gave it to me. Open it. Lena looked confused but obeyed. Inside the pendant was a tiny photo. Adrian's expression suddenly froze. The world around him seemed to stop. Because the picture inside the necklace showed something impossible. A much younger Lena, standing beside a woman Adrian knew very well. His late sister. The sister who had died years ago. Adrian's voice dropped to a whisper. Where did you say your mother got this? Lena blinked in confusion. My mother worked for your family years ago, as a housekeeper. Adrian's heartbeat thundered in his ears. Her name? Maria Kovalenko. The name hit him like lightning. Because Maria Kovalenko had once worked in the Volkov mansion, and she had disappeared shortly after Adrian's sister died. Adrian slowly looked from the necklace, to Lena, to the baby peacefully sleeping in her arms. For the first time in years, the powerful mafia boss looked completely stunned. Because a terrifying possibility had just entered his mind. The poor maid he had just fired might be connected to his family in a way he had never imagined. And if that was true, the truth about Lena would change everything.